And if any
We are
attendees,
going live.
oh, okay,
We're
great.
waiting 1 second. Hold on. Setting up the webinar.
Okay, I'm
Connecting.
just going to broadcast, or not broadcast, so I'm going to spotlight Reed's video in the meantime. And
We're
Tim,
live.
when
There
you
we go.
heard any attendees.
We are going live.
Oh, okay, great.
We're waiting 1 second. Hold on. Setting up the webinar.
So when Tim gives the okay, Reed, I will give you the 5-second countdown kind of situation, just FYI.
There we go.
Okay, Reed, I'm about to start the recording, so you're welcome to speak in a few seconds.
And go.
All right, everyone, welcome to our architecture webinar tonight. So we have an amazing panel set up for everybody, and we're so thrilled you guys could join us. So this panel is called Architecture Matters, the Genesis of the Idea, how our thoughts become architectural experience. And we have for you an amazing panel. So we have Jennifer Asselstein. She's actually the undergraduate director of the School of Architecture. Jennifer has over 35 years experience in the field of architecture and design, and she earned her Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Minnesota, and she even received an award from the American Institute of Architects. She studied at London's Architectural Association, and she's worked in the US, London, Sydney, and many locations abroad. So her professional projects have addressed multiple scales and typologies, from sustainability, focused single-family residence, to senior housing, and from a Red Cross chapter facility to culturally sensitive global resort and hospitality developments. She has initiated award-winning teams in the design build studio and teaches sustainability in building systems as well as her first-year studio. So if you guys haven't noticed, I'm reading right from her bio, but let me just tell you personally, I work with Jennifer and she cares a ton about her students. She cares about architecture and she cares about getting the message out there. And I take it upon myself to read from her bio because I know she won't give you guys all this amazing background on herself, but her qualifications are second to none. And then our other guest today is Daron Serbin. Daron actually completed his undergraduate degree in music from the University of California, Riverside. So why I like to point that out is because many of you might have a unique background that's not architecture related, and that's okay. We have an amazing program, both graduate and undergraduate, that can teach people from the ground up, but vice versa. If you're coming from similar backgrounds like engineering, drafting, or even a Bachelor of Architecture degree, you'll still find the challenge and what you're going to need to take your career to the next level in this path to licensure program, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So Daron is going to be a great example of someone coming from a completely different background and making his career in architecture when he found out that was his passion and he found the tools to pursue it. So what makes Daron amazing, not only is he a studio faculty member here, but he is actually our emerging technologies coordinator. So the School of Architecture Academy of Art has some of the best digital technology and curriculum that you're going to find, and that's Daron's specialty. He's looking at how we can continue to build 3D and future technologies into the architecture studios and the programs. And he has a background where his design studio is focused on homelessness and social equalities. And he does seminars in 2D and 3D media, color theory, fabrication, and storytelling. His design and research practice integrates digital technologies as storytelling devices in respect to architecture and sound. And for him, he is the co-founder of Studio Side Project, which is actually an Oakland-based practice focused on architecture and media. So he was born in Tel Aviv and he has lived in the United States since 1987. So when you talk about a very global and broad perspective on architecture, on culture, and how it all comes together, he's going to be the go-to. So I hope everyone's ready for just an amazing night. What I do want you guys to know, there's going to be a lot of time to get you involved and ask questions. And we're going to actually have stops in the middle of this where they bring up a big bulletin and it says questions, and that's your guys' time. I'm going to be in the chat pod, and my goal is to make sure I answer any of the simple questions along the way, But really what I hope is that you guys are all paying very close attention, you're learning something new, and you're having a ton of fun. And what I do want you guys to do, get your pencils ready, get your paper ready. I'm going to be following along. We want you to follow along as they're doing this whole workshop on how to draw, how architects are inspired, and how they take an idea and put it down on paper. So I'm going to be in the chat. Follow along, get your pencil and paper, and get ready for a great night. I'm going to turn it over to Jen and Daron, and we're going to get started.
So ominous from the beginning.
There we go. Okay. So I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. It's going to just, this is Jennifer. I'm just going to stop sharing for one moment and switch over. Okay. I think you guys have a full screen now that says Architecture Matters. So these drawings are kind of the inspiration for tonight's discussion and interactive workshop. I'm really excited to see how many people are here. I'm also excited to see how many places you're from. Some of those places are places that I've been. I saw Franklin, Tennessee. I saw Wisconsin, where I was born. I see students from China. I traveled there as an architecture student many decades ago. I saw many other places that are really important to us as designers. And so I just welcome all of you. As Reed has introduced so kindly, we are talking about actually a range of things tonight. But the first question really is, how do we get started in architecture? What is it that we're actually doing as architects? So these drawings that are in front of you are really the first inspiration. Some of them are from one of my favorite architects. The upper left is from Allied Works. This is actually the first drawing for a guest house in Dutchess County. The three drawings in the center are from Daron Serban, who's my partner tonight in our workshop. And the drawing on the right is a sketch by one of our thesis students who graduated 5 years ago, Paris Yuan. So with that, I just want to say that drawing is a really key aspect. Sometimes I think there's a myth that architects spend all their time in some sort of digital realm, and that is really not true. So we hope we can inspire you tonight to engage with us, even if drawing isn't something that that you think is your forte. We hope to change that tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn this over. These are my image credits, because in architecture, it's always important to make sure that you acknowledge where your sources come from. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner and colleague, Daron Serban.
Hey, everyone. So this question is kind of, it's a loaded one. It's both, what do you think you need for tonight, but then what do you think you need when you are practicing architecture or doing architecture? So Jennifer, if we go to the next slide, this is what everyone kind of thinks is required, which is this beautiful set of tools. And you've got all these different pens and pencils and sketchbooks and markers and stuff that can cost a lot of money. Some of it looks like it's homemade, but in actuality, yes, these are great things to have, but they are completely superficial. They're unnecessary. All you really need is something to draw with and something to draw on. If we go to the next slide, you can see that this is the other kind of myth of architecture, that you have to be some fantastic artist. There are many architects that can draw well, but not all architects are beautiful artists. And really what this talk is about is showing you that the formulation of an idea, the way you put down your thoughts onto paper and that they're exploring something, is much more important than producing a beautiful sketch. So whatever tool you have in hand is useful. I grabbed a couple that I have on my desk right now, and you'll see that in grad school, I was forced for a long time to use a fountain pen, even though I worked for Autodesk. They're like, no, you have to do fountain pens. I like to carry this giant marker around because sometimes it just forces me to draw in different ways, or a pen, pencils. I have drawn with food on more than one occasion. I'll draw on too many surfaces. And even though I'm the digital guy, you'll usually see me around school, even if it's Even if it doesn't zoom, you'll see me with the sketchbook. Sorry, my sketchbook just got hot on my desk because I had it open a second ago. So any tool that you use is great. And this is a quote that I adapted from Chase Jarvis, who's a famous photographer, who said that the best camera is the one that's with you. And the idea behind it is, yes, you can have the most amazing, spectacular setup for drawing, and you can have the most expensive tools or even your favorite tool. But the reality is, when you have an idea, you just want to put it down as quickly as possible and you want to explore it. And whatever you have in front of you, that's going to be the best one. So if it takes you 25 minutes to set up, how useful is it really? And so with that, there's many different versions you can use. There's the Pentel sign tool or sign pen, which is kind of synonymous in a lot of architectural circles because it allows you to play with different scales. You can see over there, you can do a fine, a thick, or a medium line at the same time. That's also why I love fountain pens. And then if we go to the next one, this is a sketch from a couple of, I don't even know, maybe a year ago or so. And it's using a different kind of a pen, and it's just playing with the idea of the line and what does the line mean. And I really didn't have an idea when I was doing this. I do a doodle every single day for now 1,600, I think today's 1,660 days, just to keep my brain fresh, no matter what, produce something every single day. Just ask a question, answer it. And if we go to the next one. So all you need for today, number one, an open mind, right? We're not trying to draw beautiful things. In fact, I have the craft of a 3-year-old. It's okay. The goal is not to make something pretty. Instead, you just need something to draw on, whether that's a tablet, whether it's a piece of paper, the infamous architectural napkin sketch. We've all done them. We used to actually do an event where we would do the napkin sketches. I have some sketches from one of my faculty members on my wall, who's our history and theory coordinator, that he drew in Florence. A pen or pencil or marker to draw with. And then my only advice or my only request for today, no erasers. I hate erasers. Erasers make us self-conscious. Erasers make us think that what we did is wrong. And instead, when you're thinking through an idea, it's much better to just go over it again and again and again, and even to redraw it 50 times rather than to erase and to try to make it perfect the first time. All right, so some ideas. Now, we're going to look at his work a little bit later. This is Dwayne Euler, and he has produced these sketchbooks since he was in graduate school. And he, as much as he's an accomplished architect, he's also an accomplished artist. And I put this up there to show you guys, in spite of me saying you don't need to draw really well, it really does help. However, his stuff, these sketches or sketchbooks are actually in museums. So in a way, his ideas are so clear and he's so thoughtful in the way that he draws that it can actually be art. That separation of what is art versus architecture, where does the line cross? That's something that we tackle with or we play with all the time. On the other hand, here are, if we go to the next one, so these are, I found a couple of my old sketchbooks from my graduate studies when I was living in Florence. And you can see, I wasn't kidding about the 3-year-old thing. These are just writing stuff down. I think I went through 14 different sketchbooks when I was for 4 months in Italy, or 5 months, something like that. Just writing out ideas, trying different things. In some cases, the same sketch over and over and over. And the idea wasn't to make it pretty, but it was to overload my brain with information, to write stuff down, because I knew if I wouldn't, I would forget. And if we go to the next line, sometimes I wouldn't have the same tools. So in this case, one of the things I liked about fountain pens is I can get my finger wet and then all of a sudden start using it as a fill. And then if I wanted to highlight something, I can use even a different color. So I would carry around some colored pencils. And I liked using brown paper at different times because then I could play with getting darker or lighter, again, forcing my brain to think in different ways. And if we go to the next slide. All right. And this is kind of the quintessential architectural sketch. This is in some other professions, maybe the mood board or ideation, but for us, this is really showing someone's brain going on overdrive, just trying out different ideas, and you're filling in every square inch of the page, trying to figure stuff out. I love this because you see also the different ways in which shading is happening. Some of them are horizontal, then sometimes it's like, I don't have time to draw everything. And this is an anonymous image we found, so this isn't any one of our personal works, but we get a sense of the attitude, we get a sense of the kind of the interest of overlapping of ideas that aren't necessarily clean. You can see that the person is kind of drawing over things, and he or she or they are uninterested in making things look very clean and very perfect. They're much more interested in getting the idea down and really understanding an idea or a topic. All right, so that is to say, I hate the word pretty, and I always ask my students to avoid using pretty or beautiful or nice, because it doesn't mean anything. It's not a conversation. You can like it or not like it, but there's no way to have a conversation. Instead, what we want is something that's productive, meaning you have a question. The drawing is meant to explore the question. So is it moving us forward? And so a productive drawing is one that gets you closer to understanding. Now, the understanding might be another question, and most cases it usually is, but that's what makes it exciting. So as you do these exercises today, in my studio, I sometimes make students draw with their eyes closed, just so that they are unable to edit and to worry about if the drawings are going to look good. Last semester, I actually did one exercise, and you guys are going to do a variation, but not quite this one because of sanitation issue. Before the shutdown, I had them draw with the right hand. Then I had them draw the same thing with their left hand. And then I had them put the pen in their mouth and try to draw it again. And the idea was, what happens when you do something that's unexpected? Can we find something in it? So these are some of the most famous architects in the world practicing today. Thom Mayne is for Morphosis. And I like some of these sketches, or Fuchsas, because these are world-renowned architects. And it kind of gives me a little bit of hope when I see their sketches aren't meant to be these beautiful Euler-esque looking things. In some cases, maybe they are, but they are very much about the idea, about the genesis of something, about looking at it at a concept and kind of working through it. And in some cases, it's clearly a Sharpie and what looks like a gold leaf, which is a fun subject to do. And this sketch we'll look at a little bit later. So we'll zoom past that one, the individual line. Okay, so I'm going to change my tone. I'm going to go from super hyper excited to see you guys to kind of much more therapist style. So go ahead and relax. It's the first thing. Kind of bring your energy down, excitement up, maybe some kind of a way of doing that. And grab whatever it is that you want to draw with, and then something to draw on. And let's just explore. Let's see what happens. And next slide. There we go. All right. So we're going to go through a series of 12 exercises. And there is no right or wrong. If you have to ask a question about it, just use your instinct. Remember, there's literally, it is impossible to do anything wrong other than just not draw anything. So even if you draw something that's what you think is completely wrong, no one's going to know. It's just between us. So don't worry about it. And we're going to spend about 60 seconds for each one. So the first thing that we would like you to do is we want you to draw a circle. Easy enough, but you can only use up and down lines, so vertical lines. And you're going to have 60 seconds to do it. And in some cases, it might take you 3 seconds and it might take you longer. So it's kind of that gauge. But if it does take you only a couple of seconds, go ahead and try to do another one and try to do it differently while still doing the same thing and see what you get out of it. You guys ready? All right, we'll put 60 seconds on the clock and go. And the fun part about an exercise like this is whenever we do this, other faculty members or even students in the past will sneak in and they'll jump in on this exercise to try to do this at least once a semester, if not more, to just get everyone to use their brains in a different way. If you do finish this, try doing it with your opposite hand. See what happens. And then compare the two, and don't ask which one is prettier. Ask which one is more interesting. Interesting might mean weird. It might mean grotesque. It might mean relaxing. Atish, absolutely. They can capture feelings. So when I was in school, oh, we got 3, 2, 1. All right, pens down, hands up. So usually we kind of go around the room after the first one and see like, okay, how are people doing with this? Since we don't have that option right now, instead, we wanted to show you a couple of examples of students. And I think actually one of them of Jennifer, who've done this exercise before. So the one on the left is kind of the more obvious one, which is people are like, oh, a circle. So I'm just going to draw a bunch of little lines, and they're going to create the shape of the circle. Works totally well. The one on the right, what's interesting about it, and it's both good and there's something that we could talk about that's that's a little maybe naughty is that Jennifer didn't draw the shape. She actually drew the filling. So she drew the negative space. And so what we're seeing is what's actually not there, which is a really fascinating idea. And for me personally, I love seeing the kind of the blotting that happens with a Sharpie. So the start and the end of the lines and seeing the way they kind of grow or change. Also, you can tell that she can draw a vertical line way better than I ever could. Okay, so are you guys ready for the second one? Okay, now, number 2. You're going to draw the first letter of your first name and the last letter of your last name. You're going to do that once, any way you want. It can be cursive, it can be script, it can be block, however you want to do it. And then you're going to do it a second time. But the second time is you're not allowed to use any straight lines. So they have to be just curvilinear lines. All right, I'll put 60 seconds and let's see what they are. And in case you're feeling like this is too easy to just draw a couple of letters of your name, remember that there's a whole field in graphic design and typography that literally people spend their careers doing monograms and figuring out what is the best way to represent that. Most sports teams have the initials in some way as a logo or a logo type. So this is actually a very, very rich exercise to do. And it's done in a lot of graphic design schools of some variation. And if you finish both of those, why not go ahead and try to do it with only straight lines? And so some of the questions you might ask yourself is, okay, I can draw this, but then you can start adding extra little tricks to yourself. Say, what if I don't leave my pen or pencil off the page? Or what if the numbers or the letters have to connect at all times? So these are little things you can think about as you're doing these. All right, and pens down, hands up. Always curious to know which one of these two was easier. If we do our hand raises in the chat, who thought that the second one is easier than the first? I should probably have asked Kathleen and Reed if they have hand raising capabilities.
I can add that right now.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll do one more and then we'll try it again and we'll see. Okay. So let's jump over to the third one. So we'll just keep rocking and rolling. And sometimes when I was in school, we would do as long as 4 minutes for one of these. And then every once in a while, my teacher, the same one with the fountain pen, would torture me. He would say, you have 4 seconds. At 4 seconds, you literally cannot look down. You're just kind of doing this. You're just drawing and hoping that the scribbles are on the page. So now the first two were kind of literal. This one is going to be the first one that is a little bit more abstract. So what we'd like you to do is draw spreading, and whatever that means to you. And it might mean that it is unrolling or fanning out or expanding. It might mean that it's widening. It might be a feeling. It could be an emotion, could be an idea, could be something literal. And as always on these, if you finish the first one, go ahead and try a second one just to see how it feels. Is it different? You can ask the same question, you can ask it in a different way. All right, we got about 10 seconds more. And let's do pens down, hands up. It's our little Top Chef quickfire way of doing this. So here's a couple of examples of students from a past semester who did this. And they did this at the same time. And they actually sat next to each other, which I found fascinating. So on the left, Iveta did spreading as an act. It's actually, in this case, it's a verb. It's the act of spreading. So we see kind of a clustering that's happening on the left side. And then the shapes are repeating, but they're spreading out to the right. What I found fascinating about this is she's also starting to play with this depth, or maybe she was just running out of time, but that the shapes become quicker and quicker and quicker. And all of a sudden the kind of the initial box and circle becomes just a little tick mark as she gets to the outside. Connor on the right had a very different idea of spreading. In his case, he was almost as if he was looking at something that had already spread out. So it's almost like an oil slick or something along the lines of kind of, or maybe it's even leaves and kind of the veins on the leaf. I'm not exactly sure. And that's kind of the fun part about this. In a way, it's almost like a Rorschach test where you can read into these drawings and you can start to figure out what is a person thinking about, or, do they feel comfortable? Do they feel confident? Are they nervous? Are they unsure? You can actually start to read that in the drawings. All right, now. Exactly, yeah, so Reed said, yeah, her word even starts to spread out, exactly. So now the next one, I think we're gonna do a gradient, but I think we're one too many. There we go, all right, well, you saw a couple, but that's okay. It's most of us are gonna know what they are anyways, but it's interesting to see how do you actually answer this. And I'll tell you, sometimes I make people do this 10 times in a row, and you have to do it differently every time. So just because you saw a couple doesn't mean you know the answer. So you're going to draw a series of vertical lines, vertical meaning up and down, and you're going to show gradient. So light to dark or dark to light, your choice. It's a transformation that happens. All right, everyone ready? And go. So one of the exercises that still haunts me to this day was our teacher, Rob Petrie, would make us do these drawings over and over and over. And he would spend an entire class, 3 or 4 hours, just making us draw. Your hand starts to cramp up. I thought I had good hands from piano, and it's like, no, clearly. And so he would just make us draw lines over and over. And some of these lines would have to be 18, 24 inches long, freehand with a fountain pen. And you're just kind of drawing it. And I can tell you that I discovered that you can fit 100 lines in an inch without overlap, if you go very, very carefully. Now for that, the lines would be basically this wide, but it's absolutely possible. Also taught me that I will never be an artist. So that was an important lesson too, or a painter, I should say. All right, and pens down, hands up. I love the fact that I'm seeing, Reed, are you doing them too? Can you put up yours just so we can see it? Yeah, all right, let's see. Oh, awesome. Look at this, multiple times. It's great. Reed is doing this for the first time. He's already better than me. See, there's no stress.
A couple of variations. That's the one I just got for gradient.
Did you do them as individual lines, or did you go back and forth like this?
I cheated on this one. That was back and forth. These ones are all individual lines, then trying like different kind of formations, kind of like stacking them.
Why do you say cheated?
Side by side.
So Reed, how can you say cheated?
Oh, because you say it feels like it was supposed to be individual lines, but I sketched them more. I did that with the circle on one too. They were almost like slanted lines, so I made connected. So they're
That's
almost
okay.
like cones or pyramid tops the whole way.
Yeah.
So not a perfect circle. I thought Jen.
I still can't draw a perfect circle, so that's fine.
Yeah, I thought Jen's example was so cool to see how the vertical lines
Yeah.
fit within the circle. And it was just a whole different way of thinking about that assignment. Never even occurred to me.
So one thing I want to point out that Reed said, which is I want you guys to get that word out of your mind today. There is no cheating in these exercises. Even if you do it wrong, I checked with the judges. The $1 million prize is not actually available at the end of these 12 exercises. So there's worst case scenario, you draw it in a different way and you're going to learn something about yourself, or you're going to see that you really like this technique, or you really like this style, or it's really cool and you can give it out as a present to someone. It's been done. Why not? Okay, let's jump to the next one. Did we skip one, or is that, there we go. Okay, now we're going to combine a couple of them. So you're going to draw a circle any way you want, any way you consider what a circle means. With that, you're also going to include some form of a gradient. Up to you to decide how you want to do that. And 60 seconds. Some of the things I might ask myself if I was doing this exercise is, okay, which one do I draw first? Do I draw a gradient and then a circle? Do I draw a circle and then a gradient? Do I draw a gradient around a circle, inside a circle? Is the circle itself a gradient? Is my gradient a circle? You can almost do it a whole exercise just kind of figuring out, unpacking what is the difference between a circle and a gradient. If we were in class right now, I actually would just stop the rest of the slides and say, that's it. We're just going to spend the next 2 hours figuring out the relationship of these two and see what happens. All right, and pens down, hands up. So this one's a little trickier because we had to combine different things. All right, let me see. It's a couple of hands are up. So that's cool to see. And I'll ask on the next one. Now, after this one, I'm going to ask you another question. But what we would like you guys to do is draw whatever comfort means to you. And that's all I'll say for this one. "30 seconds in. I don't know about for the rest of you guys, but it is brutal not to be able to see everyone's drawings. My favorite thing when we do this is to walk around the room and kind of look around everyone's drawings, or when we do it online, to post them up afterwards, at least after each drawing, so we can just compare and just spot cool things and also see excitement. All right, 5 seconds. And pens down, hands up. So let's ask another show of hands. Who thought that drawing an emotion is harder than drawing a shape? All right. You see the first couple, then it's a yeah. So, for me, one of the things that's hard about something like this is it really asks you to look deeper, to not draw kind of a metaphor, or to not draw something that you know what it looks like, but to actually ask a question of, what is it about this? What does comfort even mean to me? And then I can start to represent it in some way. All right, halfway through. See, at this point, you guys are basically all superstars. So this is easy peasy. No one so far has thrown their pens in anger. No one has started crying. This is great. And if you did, this can be emotional. I have definitely cried from drawing, both for good reasons and bad reasons. So usually in grad school, it's just for sleep deprivation, but we can talk about that at a different time. So now you're going to draw a repeating shape. What that means is you're just going to draw any shape that you want. Draw something that you can repeat, meaning don't draw it so complicated it doesn't work. And then you're just going to redraw it over and over and over until the time is up. But whatever hand you drew the shape with the first time, switch pens or switch hands, draw it again, and then switch again, and then switch again. And let's see where we get with that. So right now we're pretty much doing 60 seconds per drawing. But as you're going through these, you want to start thinking, what if I had more time? What if I had less time? What would I do differently? What would I change? So even if you don't, for me, I sometimes write notes, and you'll see for a lot of architects, they'll write notes in their sketches, because sometimes it's just faster to write about something than it is to be able to draw it. In my case, I literally can't draw half these things. So it's much easier to just write and say, if I had more time. All right, 5 seconds. And 3, 2, 1. Pens down, hands up. So maybe for some of you, this is the first time that you drew with your opposite hand. I don't know. My neighbor dislocated her shoulder and is a teacher, and a couple of weeks ago had to write report cards with her. She's a 5th grade teacher with her opposite hand. That was a learning experience for her. If you've never tried to draw with your opposite hand, it's very strange. It's like you're in someone else's body. All right, let's try the next one. So we're on the home stretch now. Okay, so you're going to take the same shape that you did last time, but what you're going to do differently this time is you're going to repeat it. You can do it with the same hand, opposite hand, both hands, with your mouth. It doesn't really matter. But each time it has to be on the outside of the last shape. There is a secret in this sketch. We'll see if anyone figures it out. All right, about halfway there. We got 30 seconds to go. It's also great. So I can only see right now Jennifer and Reed's faces. So I can't tell if anyone else, kind of the way that they respond when they look at their drawing, they go like, all right, I like it. Or, oh my God, oh no, thank God no one can see this. All right, 5 seconds. Oh yeah, all right. So that's one of the two methods. And pens down, hands up. So when we wrote this little prompt, one of the things that I'm always fascinated with is there's kind of 2 different ways you might attack this. One way, which is very topographic, is the same shape that literally, as Reed just showed, it ripples out. So it's the same thing, and we see the lines. And we'll see in a later sketch today that that's a way of showing the different kind of layers or strata of the earth. Now, what I'm always curious with, and every once in a blue moon this happens, is that someone will draw, and let's use show of hands. Did anyone draw the shapes just separately outside of the other one so they didn't cross over? Way more than I thought. All right, that's awesome. And then some of the hands disappear, which is always strange. Like, yes, well, maybe. No, not so sure. All right, so it is, again, either one of them is correct. All right, our second emotion. So go ahead and draw warmth. This one should be close to home for most of us because it is right now heating up even this late in the evening. So about 20 seconds to go. All right, and time. So again, this is one of those tricky ones because you can draw something that represents heat, but you can also draw what warmth means to you. I have a deep affection for Snoopy and Peanuts, the little dog. Yeah, I might or might not have a marking on my back that is Snoopy's or Schroeder's toy piano on my shoulder to remind myself I'm a musician who does architecture. And so there's always this thing, warmth is happiness, and happiness is a warm puppy. And it was always kind of something that pops in my head. And people would look at me weird when I draw something like that. They're like, why would you do that? All right. As it gets warm, I get loopy. So number 10. So you're going to draw very simply what an anchor means to you, but you're going to do it with your opposite hand, whatever your non-dominant hand is. So this one might be a little faster. So we'll go another 10 seconds or so. Maybe we'll speed some of these guys up. So it'll force you to think even faster. All right, and time up. So that was 52 seconds. All right, now, if we jump to the next one. Okay, this one we're gonna go fast. You only get 30 seconds to do this. What we would like you to do is draw a home, whatever you think a home is, and you're gonna draw it with a single line. Now the catch is the pen cannot leave the page at any point. You guys ready? Go. Now this is one of those ones where it really starts to force your imagination, because how do you show something without the pen leaving the page? We want to so badly. We want to draw shapes. In this case, we're having to draw a form or a continuous object. So we got about 10 seconds to go. And time. All right, now we've got one more. And now there's something that's fascinating about both this one and the last one. And I'll ask you guys after we do this one what that question is. But you're going to do the same prompt, draw a home with a single line. However, this time you can't cross any other line. This is like that game Snakes that we used to have on our calculators back in the day. And for this one, you're going to get a whopping 41 seconds. So I'm always fascinated with this one. First, when you don't use the word house, you use home, it has a different connotation. But what I find fascinating is that when you ask little kids to do this, they will always draw almost all shapes, or they will draw everything in the world as sections or as elevations, meaning they draw things vertically, like you're looking at things. And then at a certain point, we get comfortable with other kinds of notation. And when students get to high school, all of a sudden they think architecture exists top down, looking at architectural plans. And they start to associate mapping as this form. All right, and stop. And the reason I bring that up is because all we try to do when we're in school for about 3 years is get everyone to start drawing vertically again, to draw the sections and elevations, and not so much the plans. The plans are important, but there's a lot more potential I find in a section. And that's the drawing where you cut through a building vertically. Okay, so you guys survived. I see we still have the same number of attendees. So everyone did it. Proud of you guys. You guys are now all superstars. Check marks and gold stars are en route. And so what we wanted to show you guys is a couple examples of the same students that we showed you earlier, but this is kind of how they work through their ideas. And in my studio, what I find always interesting is you can tell a lot in the drawings. So in this case, I believe this is, Iveta. She has a very strong, what we call a strong line. She doesn't have a lot of little choppy repeats, but the lines she draws, especially that bottom left one, is talk about confidence. She's drawing it down. There's no hesitation. And then I love the way she drew comfort, this idea of kind of almost enveloping. And again, see, I've never seen anyone do the home that's not vertical when they do this exercise, a little house with the trees. All right, and if we jump over to I believe this is Connor. Now, Connor is a very kind of inquisitive guy, but he's also very self-conscious about his drawing. And you can kind of see it in the drawings. They're very, very squiggly. They're very kind of uncertain. They almost feel rushed. And the one in the bottom right, when I start to look at this, and the therapist in me comes out of like, why are they crossing in some places and then not in others? It's almost like his brain is moving faster than his hand. But what I also found interesting is he literally drew the anchor in the regular way. This is DJ, and DJ, as you can imagine from this, is not a scatterbrain. In this case, this is someone who's very methodical, very cerebral, very much about using the grid, using kind of every drawing. I'm fascinated with, it lines up perfectly. And you can even see the sketches behind on other pages where it almost looks like these are just like facsimiles. The drawings behind look just as kind of lined up and perfectly symmetrical. It's almost as if he did this in a computer. But this is his sketchbook, and his whole sketchbook is filled with this. So Jennifer, if we jump to the next slide, And so then this a little later in the semester, we start to do these more and more as a kind of design exercise to get students both to kind of relax and to draw and to think through drawing. But in this case, what I find about DJ is that he started to pick up a certain language of using two colors, almost the underlay. It starts off as being an underlay, the blues, and then he darkens it with gray. And then at a certain point, they just became two things that are playing against each other. And then these little ticks that you see everywhere, I'm using my mouse as if I'm so used to having control of the screen, that all those little ticks are people. So you have a sense of scale. And then my favorite thing in these drawings is always the words on the side, because it tells me that he's thinking about more than just what it looks like, but he's trying to figure out an idea, and he's giving himself clues for later on to figure out. And then if we go to the next one, all right.
I think you guys can hear me now. So the big question you might all be asking, you can actually relax now, you've done it, hooray. Somebody said their brain is aching, and I can appreciate that. But now you can relax and sit back. And I'm guessing that for some of you, you have a little bit of experience, you've done something like this before, whether it was in an art class or a beginning design class from your previous education, maybe a graphics class. And some of you may be wondering, what in the world does this have to do with designing a building? So the first thing that I want you all to appreciate is really question what it is that you were doing. You weren't necessarily just drawing a shape. You weren't just necessarily following a direction. You were translating the words on the screen and the words that you heard Daron say. You were translating them from words to something visual, anything visual, right? So that is actually what we do as architects. When we're asked to design a building or a space or a doll's house or a tree house or a garden shed or a grand park, we're really being asked to take words that describe something that we want, and that can be a collective we or the client's singular what I want, and you are translating it to something visual. You're doing that perhaps in an abstract way. So when you drew that circle, that was no longer a circle per se because you were drawing it with vertical lines, you're actually abstracting the circle, right? You can do it, you may be drawing in an analytical way where you're sort of trying to solve a problem while you're drawing. You might be drawing in a descriptive way or a literal way, something where the words that you're hearing or the words that you're seeing are translating fairly literally to something that you're drawing as a starting point. You might actually be doing the other thing that we were talking about. You might be drawing from a feeling. Where do our feelings come? They actually come from our experiences, from our memory. That holds meaning. So these are all sort of pathways, shall we say, to getting at the essence of what an idea is. And it starts, for architecture, it needs to start in some physical visual manifestation. We'll talk a little bit about the fact that it doesn't always have to start with the drawing later on, but I'm going to give you a few examples. This is another 12 examples, but I'm going to go through them much faster. These are 12 examples of what people that we would consider great architects or great landscape architects as a start, how they have used drawing as a genesis, the beginning of an idea. The first one here is Lawrence Halprin. You may not know his name, but he is one of the most important American contemporary landscape architects. He's no longer with us, but he has had an impact on some of my favorite American cities across the continent. And he is asked not to design buildings, but design spaces for people. And you see this sketch. Both of these sketches were the beginnings of Lovejoy Plaza. And you see in the sketch, you see some things that are very tangible per se. You see something that relates to some kind of energy, maybe it's water, we're not sure. You see sketches and you see something in the background that maybe relates to the place and the location. This happens to be in Portland. If you know Portland, Oregon, there's green hills, a lot of trees around the city. So these were his initial sketches, I kid you not. And this is what was designed. So we can see that in his experience, his career probably covered 5 decades, maybe 6. In his experience, he could imagine something that took the landscape that existed, the materials from the hills that existed around Portland, the idea of something natural, the rivers that flow through Western Oregon, and created in a very urban place out of very man-made materials. It is not a part of nature per se, but it's speaking to nature. And it all comes through that initial sketch. The little lower right-hand corner, I couldn't help but add, because this is actually a very different kind of drawing. And if you guys have worked in architecture, you recognize it as a plan, specifically a site plan. It's a very different way of drawing. It's actually very much more abstracted. And it is actually the kind of drawing we do when we want to get something communicated, built, measured. It starts to describe how something might be built and how large it is, but it doesn't necessarily describe experience. Here's Frank Gehry. A lot of you might know Frank Gehry. Maybe some of you have even been able to visit one of his buildings. The Disney Concert Hall is one that's been built in the last 10 years. It was sort of, built after 40 years of building his palette of materials, is building his vision. I actually, when I was a student, he was just getting started. And what we knew about Frank Gehry was that he was designing things out of chicken wire near or around his house. And that was really all he was allowed to do at that point in time. But, things change. 40 years later, he gets to design the Disney Concert Hall, which is an amazing building. And this is, if you don't know, this is titanium sheets that have been actually very, very specifically crafted and fabricated so that they can create these continuous curves. But it all came from, yes, this kind of sketch. This has been his sort of mode since he started designing 40, maybe 50 years ago. This is Renzo Piano, an Italian architect. This is his initial concept. You saw those squiggly lines that Daron represented right before we started your drawing. This is his sketch for the California Academy of Sciences. It happens to be located in Golden Gate Park. So of course, we can look at the sketch and see that it looks kind of like the building, right? I mean, it's sort of the building in 3 lines or less, or 4 lines or less, but it actually also has a concept behind it, which is that his idea was that this building was actually going to be lifting a part of the Golden Gate Park up and sliding the building, or sliding this idea of a peopled space between the roof that would be part of the park itself and the ground plane, which was the park. And then this idea of that long, kind of almost infinite line of the roof that extended into infinity. Le Corbusier. Now this is where Renzo Piano is still alive and designing buildings. Le Corbusier was alive in the middle of the last century. Ronchamp is one of his most famous projects in France. And so this is one of his early sketches. And there's the project. It's a phenomenal project. I have yet to visit it. I've tried. I went to the wrong city, went to the wrong part of France. But I'm going to keep trying because it is an amazing and very unique project. It came completely out of his idea of what a church should be, what a sacred space should be, and what the materiality should be that would describe the experience within it. Santiago Calatrava is an engineer first and foremost, and then he became an architect. He designed bridges, and then those became tall buildings. In this one, you can see quite literally through this transformation of sketches what he was thinking. He's using the body as a metaphor. We often do that. Many times we think of the body first, whether it's in the scale of our body, or in this case, in the explosion of scale, as the body is the skeleton. And in this case, it's a turning torso. The turning torso becomes the kind of skeletal structural frame for the building that becomes then this very significant tower. Tadao Ando, one of my favorite Japanese architects, look at the sketch. There's a really interesting translation here. On the left, we see the line as the line. It's representing the cross, the most sacred object in the church, obviously, in the Christian church. But on the right, he's used his architectural space to translate that line into a void. And so the line is actually light. He's bringing the light through. He no longer needs the artifact or the sculpture or the cross as a as a thing to hold. He no longer needs that in the space because he's actually trading it to bring in the cross as lines of, as rays of light through the void in the wall. A really remarkable and actually quite technically challenging way to build a building, but no doubt really profound way of experiencing the space. This one I love because this is Thom Mayne. We talked about him earlier. So this is a sketch from a sketchbook. And if we really look at it, if you guys have ever heard of this idea of right brain, left brain, well, the right brain is the side of the brain that thinks of feeling, thinks of experience. Sometimes there are no words to express what happens in the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain, we often think of as the analytical side, the side where we have to do our math or our logistics, our calendaring. And so what I love about this is that he actually takes a very simple object from nature and he applies it both in a right brain sort of way and a left brain sort of way. The left brain, the one on the left, is really describing how you might construct it, how you might scale it. It's bringing in geometry and the idea of how the curves work. Where is their radii? How do they overlap with each other? What's their relationship? And then the right side is the side that goes into the feeling, the shade, the darkness, the light, the way the sun hits it. You feel like you could hold it in your hand and touch it, right? So we actually do both of those in architecture, but not always at the same time. This is his project at Cooper Union, which is a famous architecture school in New York City. And you may not see the translation. I didn't necessarily say this was about that project. You may not see the translation, but I think what you do see is that there's a very clear idea of structure and kind of working things out. And then there's another clear idea of a vision about something as a space, as how it impacts the street, how it changes New York City. This is Zaha Hadid. I'm sure you've heard of her. She was a mathematician first before she became an architect, but the lines on the left, her idea from the Maxi Museum, don't belie that idea of her mathematical mind. What they share is this idea again of space and movement in space. She was constantly pushing the boundaries of architecture and structure and calling upon materiality and structure to do something that really buildings had never done before she came on the scene, shall we say. This is Stephen Holl. He's a storyteller. He is very much a storyteller, and he's a storyteller about space. And so you can appreciate in his drawings on the upper left, there is a kind of literal quality to the way the drawing replicates what the building became, but there's also a narrative behind that. What do those materials mean? What does the shape mean? What is the circulation through this house through this museum that he's designed? Why do these things happen? There's a whole narrative behind that experience that he starts to tell in his sketches. And then this one, which is represented on our poster for today by Allied Works architecture firm up in Oregon, the Dutchess County Guest House. So I think this one really gets to this idea of the sketch as the essence of the idea. The sketch as the essence of what could happen if you were to design a very, very, very simple guest house in the middle of the forest with the sort of minimum number of gestures or physical movement. And this is what they designed. This is what they built. So you can see a kind of series of cubes that actually encapsulate this winding steel frame. The steel frame itself actually creates individual territories between the cubes, and between the living cubes, shall we say, the habitable indoor cubes. A very elegant project. On the other side of the country, Neil Denari was designing for the New York High Line in HL 23. Now you can see the architect at work. His sketchbook is not so much about the shape of the building necessarily. It's not so much about a kind of poetic quality. It's really, how is this building going to be built? And how do the details of the structure, the connections, what we call the assembly, how is that going to impact not just the building, but this whole New York High Line, which has become one of the most famous new spaces in the last decade. And so his sketchbook is full of things that are happening at very many scales. We see this, the sort of building as a mass or a shape in the middle of the sketch, but then we also see all this process, left brain thinking of how these connectors will work, how will the material, the steel, the aluminum, how will the stainless steel, how will it play out as a solution for a contemporary high-rise. Again, moving into a very different mode, Peter Zumthor, one of my favorite architects, Swiss architect, he was first a cabinet maker. He was a craftsman. He thought of materiality as a kind of almost a sculpture, and he was meticulous. This sketch is the first sketch before he designed the thermal baths at Ball in Switzerland. You get this very, very ethereal sense of space. So the baths we know are about water. We know it's about sensation, relaxation and sensation, almost a sensual quality, of course. So this sketch was the starting point, or one of the starting points for this experience. I think the lower left tells you so much about the idea of how the stone, the cracks of light, and the presence of water and a pathway through this almost labyrinthian kind of space offers a very unique experience. And we're back to the sketchbook again, not necessarily leading to another project, but the book that Daron keeps holding up, the pages that we keep showing you, this is personal. Your sketchbook is really personal. And it's really not necessarily always something that's going to be on display in a lecture. It's going to be your process to get to something meaningful. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Daron. He's going to take you through a few projects, give you a little bit more of an idea about the process. How does drawing get us, get an architect, get a designer from A to B?
Thanks, Jennifer. So if we jump over to the next slide, it'll kind of give you a quick thing. So Toyo Ito is a very famous Japanese designer. And one of my favorite buildings of his is the Sendai Mediatek, which when you're in school, you will see this a lot. And there's a whole history for why he did this. But this initial sketch or series of sketches really talks about this idea that the Mediatek is a combination of really of three things. It's these tubes, it is floor plates, meaning just kind of the individual floors. And then it's this idea of infinity or information. There is no facade. There's no skin to the building. It's just glass, but it almost becomes transparent. And so when you look at the top sketches, or if we go back for just a second, Jennifer, if we look at the top sketches, we get this sense of dancing. And in the middle, you start to see this idea of these tubes that are almost like seaweed, but they're made out of steel. And then in the bottom, we have this idea of gradient, or how do you understand them in different ways? And so now if we go to the next one, he really saw this project as a flow of information. It's a Mediatek, a new type of library or museum. And so the different tubes are done in such a way, there's 13 different tubes and no tube lines up on any one floor from the next floor, meaning that they're constantly shifting and moving. And some of the bigger tubes are transporting people, so elevator and stairs. Some of the smaller tubes are transporting information or even mechanical systems. And there's always this interaction of what's the least amount of stuff that you need. And so it almost feels like fish is flowing through seaweed in the ocean. And so then here we get to see kind of the combination of that, or the culmination of it. In the center, we see that glass, the window, the facade that has basically become transparent. By transparent, I mean the idea that it's not even there anymore. It's almost like it's disappeared. And we see just how strong of a move the kind of the grid that he uses for the columns themselves, and that you can actually see through the building from the outside. And so you just get these different kind of individual plates that go level by level, and the building seems to almost float or shimmy as you're looking at it. Now, Brian McKay Lyons, is a Canadian architect who is obsessed with the idea of what vernacular architecture is, which is architecture of the place. So he is in Nova Scotia, which is on the far east of Canada. It's actually a different time zone than New York. It's that far east. And his family has had a farm there for 400 years. And he said there's a very strong kind of culture of shipbuilding. And what does that mean? And so he looks at the typology, meaning the styles of things, in this case, the barn, and the fact that the barn has on the one hand a very recognizable A-frame shape. We get the side and then the diagonal. But then when you start to look at the detail inside of it, it's actually quite distinct. There's different ways of kind of expressing a window or a door and where they line up. And then what happens when you look at the materiality of it. And then the other thing that's really big on this culture of the vernacular in Nova Scotia is shipbuilding. There's a long history of it. So how do we use materials? How do we use the techniques that are honest to the place? And so he has this thing that he's done every year for now it's like 14 or 15 years. And some years they take it off, but he does this, what he calls the ghost studio, where you go there for 2 weeks, a group of architects and primarily architecture students. And then you will design and build one of these structures in 2 weeks. And so if you look at these two, these were built at the same time. And the idea behind them is, on the one hand, you're expressing the material in two different ways. So they are the exact same size. The one on the top left looks very tall because the lines are vertical. The one on the bottom left looks much more squat because they're horizontal. So it's not just in fashion, horizontal lines make you bigger, vertical lines make you taller. But what's also fascinating about these is that they feel very opaque. They feel very dense during the daytime, and at nighttime they become lanterns. And so along with the shipbuilding and the barn, and you saw it for a brief second on the last slide, is there's a strong history of the lighthouse. Now, every one of these projects, and you're seeing here a series of sketches. McKay Lyons is the one I mentioned in the beginning. He only draws with Pentel sign pens. He's obsessed with them. He won't let anyone in his office use anything else. It's very strange. But he is a master at being able to capture the idea in a sketch. And so whether it's a barn or a loafing barn on the bottom left, or if, one of the things that I really like about his drawings is they're not precious, but they really capture an idea with a very few amount of lines. He's not trying to make these look pretty, but he's developed a certain language that translates from these rough sketches all the way into his finished work. And Jean Gang, or Studio Gang, has a book called Reveal that shows all these sketches, and she's always drawing and she's always working through ideas. In this case, they happen to be quite kind of almost Da Vinci-esque in a kind of exploration of different ideas. But you see that they're not precious. I mean, you can see that they're just kind of in spiral binders, and some of them are in different sized notebooks, where McKay Lyons is obsessive about the single pen. For her, it's very much about trying different things and seeing where you get with them. And so this is actually out of the Cooper Hewitt Museum. So a sketch that becomes, a lot of these sketches actually end up becoming works of art because they're so powerful. In this case, this is for the Aqua Tower and the idea of these screens or kind of terraces that exist on this project that she did in Chicago. Which, Jennifer, did you want to chime in on? You're much more familiar with her work and her project. Oh, you're still muted.
Yep. So I think one of the things I want to make sure you know is that Jean Gang is one of the most prolific living women architects in America right now. She's the designer for the Aqua Tower in Chicago, which you've seen probably in many photographs. This is the image that you probably recognize maybe in advertisements or in architecture journals. But if you compare, even though there's actually a lot of really interesting similarities between McKay Lyons' work and Jeannie Gang's, there's a kind of ethereal, again, a kind of something that's not as specific in her work. She's trying to capture, and you really see it in this drawing, she's trying to capture something that perhaps can't even be named. Whereas the vernacular architecture that Brian McKay Lyons is doing is very clearly linked to something very specific, something very physical, something that exists in time. And there's a very clear kind of equation between what he's looking at and then what he's translating it to. I think you can see in Jeannie Gang that she's looking at maybe many things at once: nature, water, light, the change of cold and heat, which in Chicago would be pretty important. The idea of density and opacity. These are all ideas in architecture that we use over and over again. But for her, it translated in this really unique tower and hotel and apartment building. People live here, people visit here. And it's in one of the most prominent spaces in Chicago.
So David Auger, who is one of the most prominent architects today, much like everyone else, but he is based in the UK, and he had the honor of designing the Smithsonian, the National Museum of American History, History and Culture. And so this project kind of has a culmination in three things. There's the kind of the overall form, but and extending out into the landscape, but then also for me, the filigree, the skin of the building is quite, it's marvelous in a way. From certain views, you see it and it feels completely solid and dense. And then when you see a view like this, so this one, it feels almost like a jewel box that is shimmering out onto the landscape. And then when you see the other ones, it becomes almost like veil, like lace. And when we look at his early sketches, if you jump back a couple slides. Thank you, Jennifer. You start to see actually that these are really early sketches, and for Auger, it's actually kind of hard to find many sketches of his work. He tends to be much more secretive about this, but we start to see these ideas of this, the mass and the void, the overall form of how is he working out, or how, you know, depending on the stage of the design, how are they working through some of these ideas, and how do they end up manifesting? So one of the fun things as students, and then even as academics, is we like to reverse engineer some of these things. You know, it's great to look at the final product, but then to really see, okay, not just how did they get to this point, but for me, a much more important question is why? Why did they make the decisions that they did? What is driving them to make those decisions?
And how does a project like this that's meant to capture the history of African Americans in the United States, how is it meant to find its place and capture such a radical history? As Jerome mentioned, David Auger resides in England, but he's originally from Africa. And so it's been an amazing opportunity to have him come to America and be part of this project.
Now, Shigeru Ban is a Japanese architect who is quite interested in materiality and in tectonics, meaning the way things get put together. So when you look at the sketch, you're probably noticing that there's a lot of emphasis placed onto the thing that's holding up the surface. We see this kind of curvilinear line, but then when you look at the drawing, you start to look, okay, where is the energy placed? Where is the emphasis placed? And it's the way that curvy line is held up with those connections, almost these things that are springing out. And so for him, it's much more about that idea of a connection rather than showing the overall form. So then when we jump forward and we see this, and this was done at Rice Gallery, and it was a design build project with students, you really get this sense of almost the weightlessness of the wood surface that is being held up by these very strong kind of metal components. And one of the things that I find fascinating is I first learned about this project through those drawings. So my brain was immediately looking at those connections and knowing what Shigeru Ban is interested in. Whereas I'm sure when you see kind of something like this, you might just focus immediately on the kind of the curve and the smoothness of it. So he's really playing against this idea of how do you define an object through its material. And then in this, so he also was quite famous for doing emergency shelters using very, Jennifer, would you say unusual materials or very humble materials?
Humble, vernacular materials. So he's been very interested in making sure that people who are caught up in some of the most tragic events of the last decade were housed after the event, were taken care of. And so the Fukushima nuclear plant that created all sorts of issues in Japan that came after the tsunami, he became very involved in the kind of problem solving of how to house so many people who lost their homes in that earthquake and tsunami. And so he actually won the Pritzker Prize, I think in 2014, both for his elegant architecture, but also for his humanitarian approach to really the culture of his own country. I think you can see in these sketches that, again, his sketches are sort of as humble and as simple as the materials that he's using, but he definitely has a kind of compositional rigor to everything that he does. And he understands, similar to going back to that building on the High Line, similar to the way that Neil Denari was drawing such a kind of, shall we say, non-vernacular and not humble project. Here, still the idea of the assembly, the idea of the connections, the idea of how something will elegantly be put together, even though the materials are not high tech, becomes a really important aspect of the Nepal house.
And then in here, you can actually see on the top right that the sketch that he had on the previous page, those connections, make themselves into these emergency shelters for made out of paper tubes for the House of Kobe in '95 after the earthquake, or I want to say tsunami.
Yeah, it was earthquake. It was an earthquake.
Oh, and then in India in 2005. And so there's this idea of reusing it and adapting. It's easily adaptable, or modular is the term we use. All right, and Dwayne Euler, we've looked at his stuff before. Incredible illustrator. These are all done by freehand with pen. He often does these, if you followed him on social media, he'll do these on plane rides when we could still take planes easily. And he'll just do one of these sketches in 3 hours or 4 hours on those sketchbooks. He's kind of, you can tell he's a little obsessive in the way he does them, because they're never, a lot of the other ones are kind of using whatever material we want. Even the Zaha Hadid sketch was on lined paper. This is as much like, I know that this is going to be a beautiful thing. But there's this real interest in density, in lines, and what does the line represent, and how do we make architecture out of lines? And so if we jump over to their Columbus project that they designed and they built a couple of years ago, you actually start to see this, the surface and the line or the inlay becoming an architectural device, meaning the line starts to thicken into a surface, but it also becomes its own thing as a pipe or as, and so the drawings themselves, these are architectural drawings. These are not art drawings, but they have a very strong character of those other sketches that you saw previously. And this is actually built. So if we go to the next slide, you capture even more, and this is not a rendering, this is what the actual thing looks like. There's a certain kind of almost immateriality, meaning we're not really sure what those white surfaces are made out of, and we're not really sure what those pipes are made out of. Everything kind of has the same kind of quality, but they're being expressed in very unique ways. And so it becomes very much about this experience. And this, wherever you're standing, it changes. Now, this is their 3DS culinary lab that they designed. And this is for a now defunct business where they were 3D printing sugar sculptures. And so it was kind of the research lab. So they asked Euler Wu to explore the idea of digital technology. There was a question from Atish about using 3D, and something like this is absolutely designed in 3D, using both additive and subtractive processes, meaning carving things away, but then also adding. 3D printing is additive. You're adding stuff, almost like clay. All right, so now, we didn't tell you this before because we didn't want anyone to be scared. There's a tool that we use all the time, and in this past few months with the quarantine in place, this is super useful. It's this device called Concept Board, which is an online platform that literally lets us create a nearly infinite whiteboard where we can place stuff. And I had a meeting with a student this morning where we're just popping stuff onto there. We can all see it in real time. We can draw over it. We can add images and so forth. And so what we thought would be fun, since we couldn't see anyone else's sketches other than Reed's earlier, is we wanted you guys to upload whichever sketch or sketches you want onto Concept Board.
Pick the one that gives you the most amount of joy, or the ones. You can go with more than one, but pick the ones that gave you joy and pleasure when you were drawing it or when you stepped back and looked at it.
And so the way that's going to work is we'll put the link in here. Let me grab it real quick. Boop. Okay, so there's a link in the chat box now. And when you click on it, what you'll see, it'll take you to the Concept Board. You might have to log in, but you can also just log in as a guest. That's totally fine. And then there's a couple different ways you can upload your image. If you have the space on your desktop, you can literally just drag the image onto here. You can also click on the little plus sign that's on the top left. And then once you click on that, you'll get a little pop-up that shows up on the left. All right, I'm already seeing people join the board. And once you click on the little plus sign, so Jennifer, if you go to the next slide, please. You'll see a thing called upload files. You can upload it from there. You could take a screenshot with your, or if you're doing it on a computer, if you have your phone, you can take a quick shot of a sketch and you can just upload it onto there. Easy peasy. And then just go ahead and just dump them on there. We'll take a little break in a little while you guys are looking at some other stuff. I will organize them and then we'll take a quick gander at these in a little bit.
So I see a question from Jacqueline about whether she can upload something that she did in a recent webinar. Sure.
Yeah.
If it's something that you drew, let's just say that it's something you drew and it should be something that you drew quickly.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking, do we pick out of the 12 exercises we did? That was the idea, that you would be picking out of the 12 exercises. And again, you don't have to limit yourself to one. We'd love to have as many that you want to upload. I know it takes a little bit of your time and attention. So while people upload, other people might have questions at this point in time. So first of all, Daron, let's just go back through this. You're going to click on Concept Board and the link. When you log on to Concept Board, you come in as a guest. When you get to Concept Board, you go to the upper left and you click the plus. And then you're going to do the upload files directly from your computer, your phone, whatever works for you guys. So type in if you're having any trouble. Daron's going to keep an eye on those things. Does anybody have any
Yeah,
other
I
questions?
just dragged down an image on there just so you can see. So you could just literally just drag it on there and you'll see on the top left, they'll say uploading or converting, and then you'll see the image. And don't worry about where it lands on the page. I'll organize them while you guys are going.
Anybody have any questions about what we've been talking about so far?
One good question somebody had earlier, Jen, was they asked if you guys do a lot of your drawing digitally as well. Do you guys use tablets or digital software?
Of course, of course. The output at the end of the day, after the first year in architecture, we really focus on hand drawing, hand sketching, hand making. And then the output translates over the next year, second year, is really a kind of translation of both making, drawing, and learning digital tools. So we're not a software-oriented design program, but we definitely incorporate the current tools to get you to be able to express your ideas. And often it is never to replicate something that's easy in a software to learn it. It's really to kind of wrestle with the software to try and make sure that the software is developing the project that you want. So I think everybody's in this Zoom app. Where is the Concept Board link? Do you want to add it one more time? Yep.
Yeah, and I was always the software guy when I was in school and in a lot of places that I've worked. And I personally, I call it software agnostic. I don't really care what the software is as long as it gets the job done. So it might mean that you do it by hand. It might mean that you use specific Autodesk software, even AutoCAD or Rhino. Or during my own studies, I sometimes would use software that I never thought I would have to use, like fluid simulators and all kinds of weird stuff.
The current softwares, I'll start naming them, Daron can add on, but we use Maya, we use AutoCAD, we use Illustrator. You might be introduced to InDesign. We use Rhino, a little bit of 3D Max. We then, towards the later part of the program, we introduce students to Revit. It is a powerful tool. We don't think it's actually a very good design tool particularly for young designers, but we know it's a very powerful tool. And by having a foundation in Revit, students have one more foot in the door. So we have one studio that allows you to, one class in the third, fourth year where you learn Revit, and one studio where you flex your muscles with it in a big way. And then you get to thesis where you really have to decide for yourself what tool sets. are going to work for you. And really over time, things are going to change again. So again, we're not anchored by any given software, but we are looking at softwares that are software that's open-ended, that's not built to per se design a residential house, or something that's kind of a kit of parts. That's what we're really trying to get away from. We're really just trying to help you understand how to manipulate software to get to the design that you want.
Yeah, and we'll for a lot of the studios, it's kind of up to you to decide what software you feel comfortable. Even in my studios, I'm okay with people drafting by hand, even though I'm the digital guy. And then with other ones, it's kind of what is the fastest way and the most efficient way for you to work through the idea. In some cases, some of the exercises we do, we'll start with 3D modeling, and other exercises will be literally what you guys did today, which is we call it the party. A party is a term that refers to the essence of an idea. And so we'll just kind of work through those, and that's some of the sketches that you saw the students do.
And one of the things that we hear from the architects who are on our faculty, the architects who are hiring, is that it's really important for those principals, partners in firms, and managers in firms, and architects who are looking to augment their firms. It's really important, as they put it, for someone to be able to draw, because if you're out on a job site, you're trying to talk to somebody about how something is going to be built. If you are in a meeting, you've really got to have some command of a drawing skill so that you can express these ideas quickly and in a very facile way. And so the hand drawing is what's with you at all times. And so this is not a kind of academic stance. This is really what we're hearing from people who are out to hire. It is not necessarily that you wouldn't be expected to use digital drawings. Of course, you will be using digital in the production and in the presentation of your projects in an office. But if you're going to be given the kind of authority to be working in multiple venues, shall we say, with the client, with the engineers, with the consultants, you've got to be able to be very facile. And so that Pentel pen is going to be your partner wherever you go. You've got to be able to express your ideas, what something means, how something is going to work, and work through, you may have in the design process with the partner in charge, you may have worked out what the intention of the design detail should be. But when you're in the field, you might be reworking that to try and express it, given all the knowledge you have, but maybe new information happens when something becomes real on site. So hold on one second. Don't shame. So on that note, if we have no more questions at this moment, I'm going to launch into something that you might be interested in, and that is, what are our students doing? So you've started to ask these questions by asking the questions about software. But what I really want to have you think about as you think about entering architecture is really to be thinking about why. What is it that you want to be doing in the end? And how do these tools get you to that place? So I'm going to start this at the other end of the program. Many of you know that we have a 4-year a BA system. And whoop. Are you guys okay? I'm noticing, hopefully you're only hearing me speaking now. So with our fourth year students, we have an opportunity for students to get the 4-year degree, which is the non-NAB accredited degree. And we have the 5-year degree, which is the NAB B-ARC degree. So I'm going to take you through some work so that so you can see some of the products towards the end of both of these degrees. So this is Chaya. This is, again, we're back to the sketchbook, except this is the sketchbook for a student. And this is his sketchbook that led him to these images for a 4th-year project that was based in the city of San Francisco. This is Jay Pack, who developed a really quite a signature way of using digital tools to create what I would call digital sketches. So there's a kind of, again, essence of an idea. It's not specific, but he was trying to develop the idea through the density of materiality, both through additive and subtractive processes, to develop a space that he was working on. Again, these are kind of digital sketches in 3D. Excuse me. And again, you see some of the techniques on the right-hand side of Jay's drawing, digital drawing here, that we were just talking about a moment ago in our own sketchbooks and in the drawings that Daron was presenting. So this idea of kind of pattern and aggregation that led to Jay's production of this building, again, for downtown San Francisco for a certain population of students. Sometimes we look at the model as that kind of, we look at that model as the kind of sketch. So these are models that drawings have done, students have done as they develop projects in their 4th year. They're kind of sections of the space. So this is not the entire building. This is a portion of the building. And again, we're no longer looking at what the building looks like from the outside. We're looking at how it feels and how it's designed from the inside out, and how the architectural vocabulary expresses the experience of the building and the ideas of the building and even the people. So this is Jason Cho, actually. And Raul Higuera, this is another study model. Now, again, these models are much more refined than you might find in an early studio, but they've actually started out in the sketchbook and as kind of diagrams that have turned into models. And then this is the project that he developed from that model. So again, these are just, I'm literally plucking the imagery out of the projects. I'm not showing you the plans. I'm not showing you the sections. Those are all really important in all of our studios, plans and sections. We're not always looking at 3D. Sometimes we're looking at the use of plan and section to commit to the idea. Somebody was talking about, was asking the question about how we use this idea, the kind of meaning of space, to think about flow and circulation through space. And that's exactly what we're talking about. When we look at plan, when we look at section, we're looking at how do we create meaningful spaces as people move through them, whether that's horizontally or vertically. Again, another sketch model, little 3D sketch model using transparency and mass. And this is the project that the student generated. This is a sectional perspective of that. And one more model, Vanilla Nyotos. So you notice she's starting to introduce some curves into this project, and then those spaces, those cutout voids that she creates, became a music space in her project in San Francisco. So this is our 4th year work. It's not the end of the 4th year. I went through one of the studios that I thought was most expressive in the imagery. But the next and the last segment of our presentation is really what our students are doing as they develop their thesis projects. So thesis is the final year of the B-Arc. I always call it the leadership year. There's a lot of things that you have to check off as part of our accredited degree. But when you get to your final year, the 5th year, the last 30 units, this is time for leadership. This is time for people to take responsibility for what they actually choose to do. It's time to think about what you want to be doing when you graduate. It's time to think about what you want at the kind of front of your portfolio. And it's time to actually also start to think about who do you want to serve as an architect. So we have 2 avenues of choice that go back to this idea of architecture matters that are really important to me. The first avenue of choice is something that might surprise you. We have a community design build studio, and it goes under the name of B Lab. And students in 2019, starting at the beginning of 2019, actually designed and built this garden pavilion for an underserved community in Hunters Point area of San Francisco. this looks like a rendering, and I promise you it is not. This is just a really professional photograph of the pavilion hours before it was finally finished in December of 2019, before COVID, obviously. So this was the client. This was a group of volunteer gardeners who had a beautiful garden literally overlooking the San Francisco Bay. And they had some money that they had been able to get as a grant, but they didn't have the facility to use that money. They didn't have enough to hire a contractor, but they had enough money to buy the materials. And our design build team, the students on the two students on the right, were part of the team that came and worked with them. There's the San Francisco Bay in the background and some of the students on the left. So they came and they looked at the site and they looked at what could be done. And they spend a lot of time talking to the clients. So one of the most important things we develop in our community design studio is the importance that it is not about us. This is about the community. This is about how we are listening to their needs and how we're, again, translating those needs to visuals. And again, we turn to all of our tools. You see the drawings in front of our student Daniel there. And then when you see the sketch models, I think the team, there were 7 students on this team, and I believe that they did about 12 different iterations of the for the possibilities of this pavilion. And it was never a slam dunk, and it kept going back to the client to get their preferences. We had to keep budget in mind. We had to think about what materials we could actually use, because we're not necessarily, we're just a team of students. You know, we're not going to be able to fabricate stainless steel or necessarily pour a full concrete structure. So with that, this is one of the early models. With that, they were able to complete in a full year from design through fabrication that started in the shop. A lot of these pieces that you see were fabricated in our wood shop at the architecture school, then taken out to site in the fall. So spring was design, summer was shop fabrication, and fall was on-site work. And these images were taken relatively recently, but before COVID. I think some of these go back to January. And this is most of the team and the client at one of their decision-making meetings. This is another project from the B Lab. This is one that's underway right now. It's called Kit of Parts. It's a imagination space and a community space between buildings. It's in an outdoor space again. It started back when our students actually did a mural in this same housing development a few years ago, like 3 years ago, I believe. And we maintained that relationship, and we were invited back to reconsider an open space that's underutilized for children and families and for gatherings. It can't be a playground. We're not really, playgrounds actually take a fair bit of specificity because of the health and safety rules around that, and we're not experts in that. So it's really a set of modular furniture that's still based on the idea of education, play, movement, and gathering. The students have completed the design. They got kudos from their clients, and they're now raising money. And if we can, we'll be in the shop fabricating this. As you can see, it's highly collaborative. It's one in which we gather information from the client. We keep going back, and the client was children, families, mothers, fathers, and the coordinators for the programs there at, this is at Bayview Commons. We even developed diagrams of how social distancing would work. The modular furniture that we're designing is movable, and so we can actually accommodate the new conditions that are happening on the project. The other alternative is Thesis Studio. So this is a little more typical, a little more of what you think of when you think of the final year of a BArch degree. It's where students are going to set their own course. They're going to decide their own project. They're going to be working with studio faculty that guide them and give them the kind of framework that we expect. But every student designs their own project, develops the research first. So there's a semester of research to do a whole range of things, understand the site that they've chosen, understand the potential clients that might be there. These are hypothetical now, but this project wasn't too hard for its hypothetical, wasn't too hard to be hypothetical because it was designed for student housing. So all architecture students can imagine themselves being the client, being the user in a project like this. You can see that it's borrowing from ideas of Toyo Ito's Sendai Media Tech. It's looking at modular arrangements of space. It's creating the ground space open for the public. And there's some beautiful drawings that go along with this project. Spaces on the inside, spaces on the outside. The next project, this goes way up into northern Canada, a town called Lacombe, Canada. It's way, way up north in Alberta. And the student has been online for his entire career in architecture. And he felt that what was most important for his city, for the robust and sort of future resiliency of the city, was a tech building that would house new industries in the building. But not only did it do that, but it actually crosses over both the highway and the train that cuts through the center of his own town, his own city. And so this is really a kind of, again, a kind of allegiance to the place he's grown up, where he's worked for the 2.5 decades of his life. And we're really proud of this project. Now on the other side of the world, this is Juliana Bento's project for Angola in Africa. Her project was envisioned. It went through many, many iterations, from the research of how an architecture project can gather water, because it's called Path to Water. Water is a resource that's very, very hard to maintain in Angola. It's a very precious resource. And so her project went through many iterations of how a building can kind of capture the preciousness of this resource. And she did a lot of study, both at very many different scales, and again, the diagram, the drawing, that start to explain how the project works, how it becomes a collector of water. But not only that, it's also an education space. It's also a space where women in particular become educated about how they can better their lives and how they can improve how they take care of their families. And so again, it's actually a resilient space in many ways. And it's thought of as a bridge across the water, the body of river that goes through the city itself. Notice bridge is a really interesting metaphor from many of the projects. Now we're in LA. Dan Fordhuber lives in LA. He's committed to the idea that we need to house so many citizens that are homeless. He did a very thorough project of how we could take a very prominent site in LA, an existing building, and a new proposal for expansion of that building in a high rise, and house hundreds of people, quite frankly. Density is really important, but not only house these people, but also give them the services they need, work opportunities, a hydroponic garden that he planted in the space. And you can see the iterations of floor plans as he moves up through the tower. This is the idea of the diversity of people that can gather in that space. And his defense of this on the day really brought up how committed Dan is to this lack of housing that we are seeing in many of the cities in America. Kenta Oya is a Japanese American. He looked at his own culture. His grandfather was in the internment camps during World War II and was a craftsman and an artist, and his work has been published. Kenta looked back at his own heritage and thought about how San Francisco has housed these incredible communities, really talented, really beautiful artistic communities over the last 100 years and more. He looked at the immigration into the city of San Francisco and the diversity over the last 100 years. He looked at where Japanese Americans lived and what kinds of spaces were left behind when they moved and migrated to other spaces. And so he envisioned a building that was going to house the beautiful crafts, not only of Japanese Americans, but of the diverse artists that come to America, not just in the recent years, but over the decades really, and how they could be housed in a kind of hidden space right off of Market Street, which, if you know, San Francisco is one of our main streets. So it's kind of the idea of hiding in plain sight. This is the section through the building. The spaces that are in white are the work shop spaces. The spaces that are rendered in gold are kind of the public spaces that become galleries. The front door isn't on the main street. It's actually through an alley. He turned the building around, so you sort of come through a small alley to enter through the back. It's like a discovery, quite honestly, in the same way that you discover the crafts and the ways that might be lost if we don't maintain spaces to keep them precious and keep them moving. And then lastly, this was the most kind of highest award given to a student this past spring. This is Nathan Linehop, another 100% online student. He lives in Peoria, Illinois. Nathan looked at the city of Peoria, the river. Again, we're talking about water and resiliency. He looked at the fact that it floods so many times, and that the city is now at constant risk. And he wanted a piece of architecture that would be a prototype for a barrier for the flood, but also serve the people of Peoria. And so he looked at something that actually moves, actually works, actually changes over time. So it's both a building and infrastructure. It opens up and it closes. It's a single element that runs along the existing tracks and starts to close. He looked at, we actually have projects in New York City that are looking at this kind of architectural movement. And he has these diagrams that show how those two pieces start to come together and start to create a barrier for the city to protect the city. The downtown is right on the north side of that image. How it would become a kind of linear barrier along the entire Illinois River there, and would light up at night, would become a closed space and a civic space. It could house events. It could house people who needed emergency housing. It could house the infrastructure. It could be a place where things are protected and stored, people are protected and stored. So with that, I hope what I've kind of tried to end this presentation tonight is that we are not just drawing for drawing's sake. We're not just designing for design's sake. We're not just designing as a fine artist would, but all of these drawings, all of the mechanisms that we use and the digital skills, of course, but they're actually meant to do something. They're meant to further our culture. They're meant to protect our citizens. They're meant to create open spaces where we need more open space. And they're meant to improve our urban environment. And so we hope that over your education, you won't see this as just a mechanism to go out and produce floor plans and sections and Revit drawings, but actually to produce spaces that house people, spaces that serve, spaces that are meaningful, and spaces that you are really proud of creating, because that's what your portfolio can make a statement about. I didn't get into talking about some of the other projects, but sustainability is always at the heart of what we're doing. It's something that we talk about quite a bit, especially in the later years. And so I just want to just sort of emphasize how important that the idea in the end is to serve a purpose. And with that, I think I'm going to be turning it over to do the reveal. Daron, am I allowed?
Yeah, it's ready to go. I'm just looking at the clock and seeing how we are with time.
Yep.
Do we have time, or do we want to go to more questions?
Well, we can do both.
Okay.
So we'll do the big reveal. And it is time for questions, so people can feel comfortable asking questions. I hope what that we've done, that Daron and I have done, has inspired you. Reed and our admissions team are always open to answering all questions. I'm not necessarily, we have 5 minutes till 9. We'd expected this to take 2 hours, but Daron and I do not turn into pumpkins. So we're here to answer questions, but we're also here to show off your work. So looks like we got about 20 drawings, maybe 30. It's fantastic.
And they thought I was kidding when I said everyone gets a gold star for posting. See? What's funny is I'll do this in studio, and then next thing I know, I'll come into the room the next time, and you'll just be, everyone will start like commenting on everyone else's work with stars and like check marks. And yeah.
So I'm zooming in, and I'm loving the images. I'm loving what you guys have around you as you're drawing. We see your circles and gradients. We see your initials done in different textures and lines. We see your home of a single line and your circle of gradient. That's great. These are really interesting. I suspect there's something about comfort within that. And the home without the line leaving the page. You see the spreading, the idea of spreading.
If you go to the bottom, there's something else that's really interesting. So this is a doodle without a doodle, realizing how hard is it to write or in cursive or in print with a mouse.
Yeah.
Anyone who's ever done any online class will know, or drawing online. It is.
I suspect that this is Jacqueline's. This is what you did in another workshop. Well done, very inspiring. I love the fact that the circles are getting a lot of white space today. That's fantastic. We could do an entire poster of just student circles.
Yeah.
Squares within a square, the expanding square. It looks like a lot of people had a lot of fun. Ooh, we've got color. Fantastic. Partie on inclusion. Awesome. Inclusion is a really important term and an important concept and an important way of life right now. And it's something that actually architecture is going to have to take even more of a voice in as we start to look at the spaces we design to make sure that they're not excluding people, whether that's people of color, whether that's people of disability, whether it's people who whose minds work in different ways. So I'm really glad to see that word on the board today. Thank you.
Craig Nelson. That's all right. That makes sense.
Yep.
Coach Craig T. Nelson.
All right. So I see fire and warmth and comfort. I think we've toured up here. Well, beautiful, beautiful lines there. Loose and flowing. Spreading. This one's very small, but that's great. The iteration of the shape. I wonder if this was always done with the left or the non-dominant hand. It's very fun. It's very fluid. I love the overlapping. I don't know if that was breaking the rules or adding to the rules, but the overlapping is actually giving it quite an interesting layering.
So one of the reasons we love this thing is we can do stuff where we can start adding in elements onto these boards as we're working. So right as you said that, I'm going to pop something onto that one, that spreading one that you're showing, to tie into, where is that guy? Oh, here it is. So if we look at that and then we pop over one of the Euler Wu drawings, wait, come back.
Do you want me to span
No,
out?
sorry, not you. I was yelling at Google. It's moving. So it's uploading right now. That's not actually the image that I selected for some reason. Let's try it again. But it very much has this quality to it. From an initial sketch. And so you start to see this language that comes up. This it's almost a transformation. Or in animation, we talk about this idea of tweening in between, where you see the steps. And that's why movies are called movies. They're moving images. It's a series of sequences that you see.
Fantastic. So it's 9 o'clock. If anybody has any questions, Doron and I are here to answer. We're thrilled. Thank you for your gifts to us tonight. These are really, truly gifts. We hope we've taken what you could think of as kind of the beginning to the end. In 2 hours, we've done what you might be thinking about for the next 5 years. We really want to orient your mind to what our professional expertise is about and what our aspirations are for all of you in your futures. Reed, do you mind putting in the chat box just the link to our spring show for students?
Yeah, I will definitely do that. And while I'm doing that, Jen, you know, I did notice a couple of these students are actually registered, and some of you are starting summer, some in the fall. You might have actually received a great email from Jennifer letting you know that many of you are likely enrolled if you're a first-time student in either LA 123 Design Philosophy or LA 219 History of Architecture, depending on your transfer credits. And the architecture department, because of COVID this summer, has a really unique opportunity where they're actually going to be doing these classes in on-site virtual Zoom meetings, just like this. So I would tell you, if you've seen an email from Jennifer, you loved actually having this kind of connection through the Zoom format and being able to see the faculty and instructors. I would tell you guys, talk to your admissions representative. I'm putting my email in there again. And please email me if you guys think you could swing the specific times this semester, because I can't imagine a better way for an online student to truly feel connected with faculty and other students than in a setting just like this. But imagine the same way all of our faces are up here in the gallery, it would be you and all of your classmates getting that one-on-one attention with the actual faculty and other students. I mean, it's incredible. So
yeah, we started that. So we started on site for my studio this past semester, and then we ended up like this. And both good and bad. My students quickly discovered that when everyone is locked at home, they have access to me 24/7. So I think we ended up officially we're 12 hours a week in class, but I think we averaged somewhere about 20 to 25 hours on this interface, just like this, because they have access to me. I want them to do the best I can so we can go back and forth. And then we started to fold in the traditional online sections. And so we would have these group meetings where we would have multiple studios, online students. My students who started on site by the end of the semester went home to India, to Prague, to Washington State, all around the country, all around the world. And then we also had international students who are traditionally online, and everyone was working together, and it created this really great atmosphere. And students were able to get feedback instantly, because not just from me, but from each other. They became comfortable seeing each other's work and having discussions, and it propelled everyone's project. So Zoom, great interface.
So it looks like everybody got most of their answers to their questions. Reed, did you see anything else that students posted?
no, I think everyone was following along, paying great attention, getting inspired. I saw a ton of people talk about how inspiring this was, and I followed along, guys. It was a blast.
All
And
right.
I've
All
been
right.
exercises like this.
So nice to meet you all through your sketches. So nice to see your enthusiasm in the chat. We hope to be in touch. And as Jennifer is ending tonight, I think that's the perfect way to end. I love architecture too. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, I turned off the recording.